Hello, everyone, and here we are. We have finally made it into the 20th century. We are in the 1900s. So, if you think of your art history journey and how far you've come during this time, you're now in the 20th century. You have basically gone from either the 1400s to now, depending on if you came in at second semester, or the beginning of human history to now. And now we're starting to get into this time period where we could actually know people who lived through seeing these architects and artists at work. So we're going to start with architecture because when we last left Europe, that's what we were covering is architecture. In fact, actually we were covering architecture more in the Americas because America during our industrial revolution kind of became the place to start really embracing the modern, all right? So that idea had kind of made its way over from France to us. And while a lot of countries in the world were still kind of stuck in the past and they were still drawing from the traditions of Greek architecture and Roman architecture, whether that was Baroque or it was Renaissance or whatever, America moved forward with modern architecture. And we saw that with Louis Sullivan when we did Carson Pirie Scott and his style. So let's review what modernism means whenever we see it in terms of art or architecture. Modernism means that basically you are getting rid of decoration from the past, all right? You're moving past Greek and Roman columns, you're moving past domes, you're moving past concrete, you're moving past those things, and you're kind of coming into the modern time. You're coming into the now. So you start to see artists who embrace what is here in front of them, and nature is in front of them. So a lot of them drew inspiration from nature, like Louis Sullivan. A lot of the buildings on the outside, because they were held up by that steel skeleton, he could use like terracotta and earthy materials to create those kind of tree-like or organic designs on the background. We saw this with Art Nouveau, where it was nature was around them, so they could still use that. But remember we talked about the romanticists, like with, the House of Parliament, like they revived Gothic. They brought that back, right? And neoclassical had revived Greek and Rome. But modernists were like, okay, can we move on? Can we just try something of the now, right? What is right in front of us? And what was right in front of them was technology and steel and glass and nature and all of those things. So modernist means get rid of the past, embrace the modern times. And these artists and architects could use modern materials, modern technology. So for example, steel as a building technique. But the whole idea of modernism is move on from the past, right? Let's focus on the here and the now and what we need architecture and art for now. And a lot of architects are going to follow in Sullivan's footsteps, but maybe put their own spin on things. Because the whole idea now is that buildings were works of art. They're not just to be built for a function. They have a form, like you can shape them to what the function is. And that really came from Louis Sullivan. So one of Louis Sullivan's proteges, who actually started learning at the feet of the master of Louis Sullivan, is going to be Frank Lloyd Wright, who is probably the most famous architect of the 20th century. And he's going to be a complete opposite to what we see going on in European architects at the time. But we'll talk about that in a second. Frank Lloyd Wright, it almost seems like his mother was trying to program him to be an architect from a very young age. Like, in my kids' nurseries, one of them was a jungle and the other one was cats, and his mom was hanging up pictures of cathedrals and ancient buildings, and she gave her kids blocks to play with just right away, where I was giving my kids like little rattles and things like that. So Frank Lloyd Wright actually got his start working in the Midwest in Chicago under Louis Sullivan, and like Sullivan, he did agree that nature is an inspiration. It is modern, it is here right in front of us, it's always been here, and that buildings should be organic. They should look like they just kind of grew here and developed here and belong here. But where Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright clashed, right, is Sullivan loved the skyscraper. Frank Lloyd Wright did not. He was like, I don't like this. It does not reflect America's need for space, Like our country was founded on this idea of kind of like the oxbow of space and reaching out and being one with nature. And to him, a skyscraper, no matter how much tree you put on the outside of it or how much iron you use to make it look like trees, that's not nature. So he believed that buildings should be part of nature, not decorated by nature, but actually be a part of it. So Frank Lloyd Wright is known for the organic style or organic school of architecture, and he was inspired by Sullivan. Sullivan was his mentor, that he didn't want history, right? He didn't want Greek, he didn't want Roman, he didn't want Gothic. He wasn't trying to reference that in any way. He was drawing what was right in front of him, and that's nature. And he liked to build homes, particularly homes that looked like they were part of the environment that's there. Like they just grew there or fit in with it and allowed people to appreciate nature from the inside out of the home, right? He didn't like tradition. He's like, okay, we've traditionally always used Greek columns. We've traditionally always used Roman domes. We've traditionally always used marble. No, he's like, I don't want the past, right? I want the present. And what is right in front of us, because he didn't really like the industrial present, is he likes the nature present. So it's actually kind of sad that Louis Sullivan actually fired Frank Lloyd Wright because they had a difference of opinion in terms of what nature meant. All right, so Sullivan is basically using nature as decoration. That's not Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright wants his buildings to almost be living, breathing parts of nature. So he opened his own studio in Oak Park in Chicago, and he started designing houses for the Midwest. What he developed was called the prairie style. That's what he's kind of known for, because the environment he was living in outside of the cities, because remember, he's not a big city worker. His houses are more generally outside of the city, is he's working in the prairie, right, which is very flat, right, and kind of extends out and spreads out like, the prairie was at that particular time, because we weren't this big industrial place yet in the Midwest. And he believed in site-specific architecture, that it needed to naturally fit in with that. So that means using natural materials from that area. It means making the home part of the nature around it, whether that means building it into hills or around a waterfall. And I like this quote. He says, nature builds a tree from the inside out. That's what organic architecture is. It's building the way nature builds. So building a house from the inside out, and all of it is part of nature together. And that definitely could be an influence from Japanese style architecture as well. Like we've seen with some of the temples that are very nature based because of their belief of nature based spirits. He liked to use a lot of windows, because windows allowed the person inside the house to gaze out into nature, and then it allowed the sunlight to come in and light up the interior space. And he didn't like for the insides of his homes to be very different from the outside of his home. So it was a design concept, like the furniture, the bookcases, the fireplaces, all of it was meant to be one cohesive design. So for example, this is the Roby House, which is in Chicago, and it is the prairie style because it expands out. Everything about it looks like it stretches outwards, like these huge planks that are coming outwards from the house. The roofs extend out, and it's almost very flat with just a little bit of leveling, kind of like the soft hills of the Midwest. And I mean, the light, lots of window to allow in shade and light so that person inside the house would feel connected with the inside. So, and vice versa with all those windows. This one's actually in St. Louis, and you can see he built it into the natural hills. And Missouri has a lot of red clay and a lot of Missouri red granite. So even though this isn't made of granite, it matches that Missouri part of it. Like it's very Missouri. So this is a term you need to know that is a technique. So a way of doing something used by Frank Lloyd Wright. And this is called cantilevering, all right? So cantilevers are these, so if you think like a lever kind of goes like this, all right? This is like these levers, these like beams that projected out into the air, which is a very Frank Lloyd Wright thing to do. Like they're sweeping outwards, almost like going into nature so that people could walk out on them and experience nature. Now, sometimes they'd have some support underneath them, sometimes they wouldn't. And that's actually been a problem for some of the Frank Lloyd Wright houses because some of these are collapsing, right? Some of his houses are falling because they weren't that structurally sound because these cantilevers were reaching out. So it's almost like sweeping out onto the prairie where you could actually go out and be part of nature on these. And it kind of gave you that feel of the sweeping flat plains. So this is the inside of one of Frank Lloyd Wright's houses. And you can see that everything that he did with the house was to match the outside. He used a lot of wood. He used a lot of local materials, rocks, so that even if you were inside the home, you still felt like you were in touch with the nature outside of the home. And everything is all about these clean geometric lines that kind of made it one cohesive. And his very open floor plan that he would use. There weren't a lot of walls dividing up rooms because nature is very open. So this is kind of the same idea that everything just kind of flows through from the inside to the outside. So the piece that they picked for the 250 is domestic, which means it's a home, a domestic architecture, and it's called Falling Water. And it's located in Pennsylvania, and it's also called the Kaufman House because of the person who commissioned this, all right? And Frank Lloyd Wright, whenever he built this, he found a spot on this Kaufman Reservation, because Kaufman was very big about nature preservation, that was a waterfall. And he was like, I can do this. He's like, I can make a house that is part of the waterfall. It is with the waterfall. And no matter where you are in the house, you can always hear the waterfall because that would make you feel like you were in nature at the time. And it basically, he said that the house should be not on a hill, it should be of the hill. It should be made of the same materials as the hill, and it should be built into the hill. So you can see here, like right in the middle of it is this fireplace, right? And this rock that is kind of the center of the house. And everything is kind of projecting out from that, from the center of it, because those natural rock materials are the same as on the outside and inside of the house. And these cantilever beams project outward. So like you go out into nature, you're over the waterfall listening to it, and you can see all of those windows that would make it feel like you were looking out, even if you were inside and you were still part of the nature on the outside. So you can see here that this is the part of the waterfall, and it's a little pool actually running under the house and then going towards the waterfall. And that sound of the water rushing is this constant reminder of nature. And you could stand out on one of the cantilevers and look down and like be on top of the waterfall. You could be right even with it. So Falling Water is actually considered Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece, even though that they've had to do a whole lot with it because it really is those cantilevers, balconies are starting to collapse under the weight. So there's been a lot of structure that has to be done with it. And you can see how organic it is. It looked like it just grew here. Like it just came from it. So there was this boulder that was sitting there, and that kind of became the center of the house, and everything else radiates out from it because that was kind of the rock of the house. And you'll notice he uses the colors are the buff colors of the sandstone, like even the colors of the house, like the darker browns and the lighter browns and the reds, all kind of match what he would see in the stones and the water. And the glass around it gives you the chance to kind of feel like the outside is in, and then that light comes in, and the interior was designed to match it. And Kaufman even said to him, he's like, I didn't think you'd put the home over the waterfall. And he's like, I want you to live with the waterfall, not just look at it, but for it to be part of you. And you can see here, like there was a tree growing there, and they didn't cut the tree down to make the house. They just moved this around it, kind of like water flows around an object. They just flowed the house around that tree that is still there. So this is sitting on the inside, and you can see that the rock that he used is the native rock. And that same rock is the same thing that's on the other side of the wall, on the other side of the glass. So there really is no separation between the interior and exterior of this house that's built over the falling water, right? Now, all right, this is really kind of an example of a domestic house, all right? So a domestic building during this time. But the fact of the matter remains, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, we are in an industrial world, all right? So we are in this time of cities growing up and cities building, and we're going to see new ideas as we enter this modern age about what those type of buildings will look like. So just like with Sullivan, right, you see Frank Lloyd Wright kind of adopt his mentality for domestic homes, but we're also going to see people kind of take Sullivan's ideas and adapt those to commercial buildings, commercial meaning like for business buildings, because it was starting to be believed that your building was your calling card. Like it was something that reflected what you were selling, who you were, what you valued, because this was the first thing that people would generally see when they would come to do business for you. So architecture, not just domestic, but also industrial and commercial, is also going to be highly impacted during this time, coming from Sullivan's innovation with skyscrapers. So we're going to jump over to Germany now, okay, because there's a movement that's going to happen in Germany after World War I that really reflects what was going on in Germany and in Europe in general at the time. So we know that European architecture had really kind of been stuck for a really long time. They were either reviving Romanesque or Gothic, or they were reviving, classical Roman, Greek, Gothic, whatever. But when World War I happened, it really started to shake things up, all right, a little bit in Europe. And it started to make people realize that we're not living in the past. We are living in a very modern time. We just saw people fighting a very, very modern war. And in Germany, you've got a couple issues that are happening, because you have this new republic that they just got rid of their king. So there was this ideas of having a little bit more freedom, but there was also, especially after Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles, kind of this rise of communism and socialism at the time, because Germany was so broke, so broke, that communism started to kind of sound good to a lot of people, or socialism, this idea of equality among people. But that's not really going to go well with the rise of the Nazis, because Nazis were fascist. Even though Nazi Socialist Party, they're not socialist at all. They were very much fascist, where the idea is that one group is superior to another. So that's kind of going to cause a problem. But after World War I, when Germany is really, really suffering, and they've been exposed to the ideas of communism, especially while fighting Russia, we see a movement kind of arise that's architectural, but yeah, it's buildings that reflect these new ideas. So we see the start of something called Bauhaus, which means building a house or construction of house. And it's founded by a man named Walter Gropius in Dessau, Berlin. Right? Actually, it started in a little bit of a different location, but because they got a lot of pushback for their style, it had to move to Dessau and then Berlin. This Bauhaus was a movement, right? It's an idea, and the architecture just represented that idea. And what Bauhaus was about was the idea that housing should be equal. It should be egalitarian, that it should be something that's provided to everyone. And if that's going to happen, you need housing that is not decorative, you want it fast to make, almost like it was made pre-packaged with the parts, almost like IKEA architecture, that it's simple pieces that can be very quickly put together, no frills, no muss, no fuss. And this kind of was the architecture that represented that rising socialist idea at the time. This was housing that would be for the common man, that was affordable and could be mass produced quickly for everybody. So this is what Bauhaus architecture looked like, right? It was supposed to be economical, so cheap, fast to produce, which means no decoration on the outside. It is a place to live. That's all. All right. This was architecture with an agenda because you had so many people after World War I who were poor, displaced from their homes had been lost. And these people who supported this socialist idea that housing should be available for and that it should be cheap and affordable and quick to make, Bauhaus was your answer. So basically, these were homes and a design style that would be white walls. That's it, because painting takes too long. Plain, simple interiors with furniture that matched, that could be easily put together. It's IKEA. It's early IKEA. Flat roofs. You'll just put the roof on. Plain materials that could be easily made in a factory. Glass, steel, not really any wood because that takes time to carve. Stuff that can be pre-made. And you want your windows that are even with the walls, right? And this was actually good because that brings in a lot of natural light. So that's very efficient. It could naturally warm the house. So that's good. Basically, these looks like Bauhaus were like boxed houses. This is actually the grave of Walter Gropius, the guy who came up with this idea. And you can see here how simple even his grave was. It looked like it could be mass-produced very quickly in geometric shapes. So again, Bauhaus was an idea that had buildings that represented it. It was an idea everybody should be able to have this affordable home that was quick to make with nothing fancy, mass-produced glass, steel, white walls, flat roofs. That's it. All right. And in Germany, it actually got a lot of pushback when the Nazi Party started to rise to power in Germany after World War I, because this type of building style was all about equality and something for everyone, which Nazis don't believe in. They believe there's a superior group. They believe that buildings should represent superiority in some people. And some people called these glass and steel cages, which essentially they kind of are. This is actually the Bauhaus building. This is what it looked like. So even the building itself reflected the idea. Simple colors, steel window frames, glass, flat roofs, nothing fancy. All right. So what we see develop, okay, so here's what happens. This style starts to become pretty popular in Germany with people who like the idea of communism and socialism. But like I mentioned, the Nazis in the 1930s decided to close the Bauhaus school, mainly under the direction of Hitler, because Bauhaus architecture represented the Bauhaus philosophy, which was essentially socialist or communist. A lot of these architects, Walter Gropius, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who we're going to talk about, all of them had to leave Germany or face death. They would have been killed by the Nazis. And a lot of them ran and came over here to the United States, and they found themselves teaching in American universities. They found themselves opening up their own architecture firms while they were here. Meanwhile, over in Europe, Hitler is a big fan of the classics, huge fan, because he believed that was the good old days. And he was ordering that classical architecture return, especially Roman, because even the German symbol of the eagle, that's Roman, because they were trying to create this new empire. So all of a sudden, this Bauhaus style comes over here with the architects who kind of leave the idea behind, because communism, socialism doesn't work here in the United States. You guys know that. It's just everything we don't believe in. So they brought the architecture over here, but not the idea. Now, because this was a German style of architecture and there was a lot of anti-German feeling in the United States, they weren't going to call it the Bauhaus. They were going to call it the international style because it came from overseas and basically it could apply everywhere. And it started to take hold at major schools of architecture in the country, including Harvard and the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. That actually was one of the home bases of Bauhaus during this time. So the only problem is that in America, where these architects were displaying their artwork was in museums, and it shows that only the wealthy could attend. And the wealthy loved this style of architecture. They thought it was so chic and so clean and so different. But the poor people are going through a depression at this point. They're not going to see that. So what's ironic is the Bauhaus style in America actually became a style of the wealthy, not the everyday common man, like it was meant to be in Europe. So we're going to see in America and also in other countries that weren't Germany, we start to see this international style of architecture, which also the French did not call this the Bauhaus style. They called it the international style too, because France really hated Germany. We see other places like America and like France start to adopt this Bauhaus, although they didn't call it Bauhaus, they called it the international style. To them, this was something new. It was moving beyond the past. It was moving forward, which they were trying to do. So we start to see this new style of architecture show up even in homes. So we're going to see this in France with an architect named Le Corbusier. All right, so he's a French-Swiss architect who was rumored to be incredibly difficult to work with. Like, nobody liked to work with this guy. They didn't like to work with Frank Lloyd Wright either, because they were both so set in their ways. And I think these two would have absolutely hated each other, all right? This guy fully embraced the idea of everything the Bauhaus stood for, except that it was for the everyday person, because he was designing these mansions that were extremely expensive in this new international style. So we have Louis Sullivan, who believes form follows function. We have Frank Lloyd Wright, who believes in organic architecture. And then we have the polar opposite in Le Corbusier, who believes that homes should be a machine for living. If we're living in this machine age, then homes should be machines. He does not really care about the nature around him. Sullivan really drew from nature, which he could see around him. And so did Frank Lloyd Wright, who basically built into nature. Corbusier was like, if you need nature, put it in a pot on a roof. You can have nature that way, right? He is wanting homes that were functional. They were meant to be lived in and to make living as efficient as possible. All right. So he likes the straight lines because these need to look like things that could be machine made. If we're living in the machine age, let's have houses that look like they were made by machines, something that were made on an assembly line and then assembled. Nothing from the past. He doesn't want any reference to the classical past at all. He doesn't even like arches at all, right? He's going to completely move away from that. And that buildings should look different from every single angle because machines are moving. So if you moved through this house or outside this house, it would almost look like the building was moving because machines move. We're moving ahead, not sitting still in the past. So this is what a typical Corbusier home would look like, where every inch of it was available for space. You'll notice that it's built up on what he called pilates, or like stilts. That's so that you could park a car underneath it, you could put space underneath it. It's almost like those loft beds you see in college, where you can sleep on top of it and then have space underneath it. And everything here is straight lines. It's white, not a whole lot of decoration to it. Everything is in, like, stairs even were inconvenient. He likes ramps. He likes spiral staircases because those are thinner. They can go straight up instead of at an angle, taking up space. Everything was designed to be not classical. I mean, no arches, no columns, no Baroque, no Gothic, nothing. This is modern machines that you live in. That's it. And everything on it was meant to be functional. These roofs were meant for shade, but to also trap light. Lots of windows to bring in natural light and heat, not so you can enjoy the outdoors. He doesn't care. right? Sunlight is functional, not pretty to look at. Here's another one. They're very cold, right? I would never want to live in one of these houses because nothing about this says cozy, right? There's a Le Corbusier. Now you'll notice that this has red, white, or red, blue, and yellow in it, and we'll talk about that later. That's actually because of a popular design style at the time. So Le Corbusier had what was called the 5 points of architecture, right? So his first thing that's typical of a Corbusier is raise the building on pilates or stilts, which means that the walls don't have to hold the building up. The pilates do at the bottom. This allows for a lot of windows, ribbon windows that wrap all the way around the house. So it is supported from the bottom, not the walls supporting it. The walls are supported by the stilts at the bottom, which means just like Gothic, even though that's not what he was going for, you can have lots of windows around it. So that way you can have lots of light, natural lighting, and sunlight to warm the house, all right? So this means that you can have a very open floor plan. You don't have to have a whole lot of walls separating the rooms, all right? You can just have a very open floor plan where things can move freely. Walking from room to room takes up too much time. That's just not efficient. This is a machine meant to make things efficient. The face of it, so the outside of the building, no decoration, nothing that you have to put on it, just white walls. That's it, all right? The ribbon should be the ribbon window so you can get light evenly through the house, and the roof should be flat, all right? As much as possible. If you need nature, put it on the roof. The sunlight can get it. You're not living in this house to look at the outside or to feel part of nature. If you need it, put it on the roof. So to Corbusier, he could put one of these houses anywhere, right? And I mentioned Mies van der Rohe here, but we'll talk about him later. Mies van der Rohe, who designs like skyscrapers and buildings, still has like a little bit of classical look to his style, even though he uses the international Bauhaus style. Corbusier does not. He does not care where this is located. You could put it in the middle of a beautiful garden. He does not care, right? The exterior design, he's not trying to make it fit in. He's not trying to embrace nature. If nature's there, it's functional. Grow a garden on the roof that you can grow food out of. Put some flowers on it if you need a little nature. Here, does it have good space for light? That's it. All right. He doesn't care what the exterior looks like as far as the environment around it. That is a Corbusier chair, right? At Villa Savoy. All right. So Villa Savoy is the work that they've picked for the 250. All right. And this right here is Villa Savoy. And looking at it, you can see his 5 points of architecture right there. And even on the inside, the furniture looks like machines so that you can sit efficiently, right? It's like an IKEA house, right? Without the pillows, all right? What he would do in order to do this is another new technique using modern materials, something called ferroconcrete, right? Which means that inside the concrete that he would use are steel bars, all right, which means that the concrete is supported from the inside. So that way the walls don't have to hold that up, which allows him, because the top is supported by the bottom, he can have that ribbon of windows all the way around it. And then, of course, if you need a little greenery of whatever, put it on the top of it. But it's going to be on it, not made from it. It's not organic architecture. If you need something organic, grow it. And it's purest white. No decoration, because that takes too much time. This is a machine to be lived in, and that's it. All right, so let me see if I've got the name of Villa Savoy. I don't have Villa Savoy. I'll make sure I tell it to you. All right, it's like, here's the inside, right? Everything, there's light coming in. Everything's white on the inside. You have the spiral staircase that goes up instead of taking up more space outward. Here you can see another one that it's got the Pilates at the bottom and the building at the top, and then the ribbon of windows. So this is Villa Savoy that's built in 1929. You can see that underneath it was plenty of places for parking cars efficiently. The ribbon of windows around it, you can see the spiral staircases going up to the top. But everything on here was meant to be functional, not decorative, not pretty. This is a machine to live in. and lots of windows for light. So there, you're going to take out the land on the ground, replace it with a garden on top. All right, so this is just a couple other views of it. You can see the chair, right, which is very typical. Same thing, clean lines, right, kind of moves with the house a little bit. Cleanse your home, cleanse yourself. So basically get rid of everything from the past, let go of your past, let go of anything that colors it, just a white coat of paint. And then every room, as you move from room to room, is the same. So here's his 5 points of architecture. All right. So we are going to stop there. And next we will start to look at how this Bauhaus international style started to be adopted by business owners during the time.